didn't forget me. He planned it. I need you to understand that before anything else, because for a long time, even I tried to tell myself it was a misunderstanding, that maybe there was confusion, that maybe he didn't think it through. People do careless things. People make mistakes. But this wasn't a mistake, and I think, somewhere deep down, I knew that the moment I watched the gate close. My name is Paige. I'm 28 now, and I'm telling you this story because I've never told it completely, not to anyone who wasn't already there, not out loud, not in a way that actually made sense of everything that happened. But enough time has passed, and I've done enough therapy, and I'm finally at a place where I can say it without my hands shaking. I grew up in a house in suburban Ohio where love was rationed. That sounds dramatic, but it's the most honest way I know to say it. My mother wasn't a cruel woman. She would have been offended if you'd called her one. She went to church on Sundays. She brought casseroles to the neighbors when someone had surgery. She was capable of warmth. She just distributed it unevenly, and my older brother Trevor got almost all of it. Trevor is 4 years older than me. Growing up, I thought that was why, that he'd simply had more time to earn her devotion, and I'd eventually catch up. I was a kid. I didn't understand yet that the game was rigged from the start. Trevor was charming in that effortless way some people are born with. He could talk to anyone. He remembered details, your dog's name, your favorite team, what you'd mentioned offhand 3 weeks ago about wanting to try a new restaurant. Adults loved him. Our mother adored him. And Trevor, for his part, loved being adored. He cultivated it carefully, consciously, the way some people tend a garden. The thing about living in someone's shadow when you're a kid is that you don't always recognize it as a shadow. You just think that's what light looks like. Dim and mostly directed somewhere else. I got decent grades. I stayed out of trouble. I didn't ask for much. I told myself I was low maintenance, and for a long time I believed that was a virtue rather than a survival strategy. Trevor and I were never close, but we weren't openly hostile either. He ignored me the way you ignore furniture, not with contempt, just with a kind of fundamental indifference. I existed in his peripheral vision. That was fine. I'd learned to exist in peripheral visions. The trip to London was my mother's idea. She'd always wanted to go. She had this image of herself walking across Tower Bridge, having tea somewhere with tiny sandwiches, standing outside Buckingham Palace in a good coat. It was her 65th birthday the following spring, and Trevor had offered, loudly, generously, in front of the extended family at Thanksgiving, to take her. A birthday trip. Just the three of us. I remember the moment he said it. I remember my aunt saying how wonderful and my mother's eyes getting bright, and Trevor catching my eye across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. I thought it was excitement. I understand now that it was something else entirely. The planning took months. Trevor handled most of it. He was always good at logistics. He'd built a career on it, actually, working in supply chain management, and he took over the trick details with the same precision he brought to everything. Hotels, flights, day trips. He forwarded me the itinerary once, about 3 weeks before we left, and told me to make sure my passport was current. I didn't question anything. That's what I have to live with. Not that I was stupid, but that I trusted. I trusted because he was my brother and it was my mother's birthday, and I had no reason, no concrete reason to believe that anything was wrong. We flew out of Columbus, connecting through JFK, then the overnight to Heathrow. 14 hours total, including the layover. I slept on the transatlantic leg, woke up stiff and disoriented, and stood blinking in the arrivals hall at Heathrow while Trevor navigated us toward the tube with the confidence of someone who'd been there a dozen times. The first 2 days were fine. Actually, they were more than fine. London in early October is genuinely beautiful, that particular grey-gold light that comes through when the clouds break. The city looking ancient and solid, and somehow both enormous and walkable at once. We did the tourist things. Tower of London, Borough Market, A Thames River cruise that my mother loved, and Trevor and I stood through mostly in silence, side by side, watching the skyline. I have a photo from that cruise. My mother is smiling at the camera. Trevor has his arm around her. I'm standing slightly to the left, half a step outside the frame. Story of my life. The trouble started, though I didn't recognize it as trouble, on the third day. Trevor had booked a day trip to Edinburgh, a morning flight up, a few hours to walk around the old town, an evening flight back. My mother had mentioned offhandedly once that she'd always wanted to see Scotland, and Trevor had taken that and run with it. The morning of, I came down to the hotel lobby at the time Trevor had specified and found him standing at the front desk, frowning at his phone. "There's an issue with your ticket," he said, without looking up. "What kind of issue? System glitch or something? Airline's website is being weird. Just give me your passport. I'll go sort it at the check-in counter directly." I handed it over. Of course I did. He was handling everything. That had been the whole arrangement. He took it, along with the travel folder he'd been carrying all trip, boarding passes, hotel confirmations, the whole thing, and told me to wait in the lobby with my mother while he went ahead to the airport to sort it out. Since the flight was only 90 minutes away and there was no time to waste, he'd meet us there. He'd text me the terminal. My mother and I took a cab to Heathrow. He was not at the terminal. I texted him. No response. I called. Voicemail. I had my phone, thankfully. Trevor had suggested I leave it charging in the room since the battery had been running low, and I'd ignored him on that particular point, which turned out to be the only decision I made correctly that morning. My mother was getting anxious. Our flight to Edinburgh was boarding in 40 minutes. I went to the check-in counter and explained that my brother had our documents. The agent looked up our booking. "I'm showing a reservation for 2 passengers," she said carefully. "Your brother and your mother." I stood there. "I'm not on the flight," I said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am, I'm sorry." I turned around and looked at my mother. She was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not quite guilt, not quite surprise. Something that looked terribly like relief. "Mom," I said, "what is going on?" She started crying, which at the time I interpreted as distress. I understand now that it was something closer to being caught. Trevor called back 40 minutes later. By then, my mother's flight had boarded. She'd gone. She'd actually gone. After I'd stood in the departures hall telling her to stay, telling her we needed to figure this out, telling her something was seriously wrong, she'd hugged me, told me Trevor would sort it out, and walked through the gate. I was 26 years old. I was alone in Heathrow Airport with no passport, no cash. Trevor had also been holding the emergency travel card my mother brought and a phone at 14% battery. Trevor's voice when he finally called was pleasant, measured, like he was explaining something obvious to someone slow. "There just wasn't room for you on this leg," he said, "budget reasons. Mum really wanted Edinburgh, and the extra ticket was too expensive, so we had to make a call. You took my passport, Trevor. I'll mail it to the hotel, or you can wait at Heathrow. We'll be back tonight. There's a pret-a-manger by the departure gates. You can just..." I hung up. I sat down on a bench near the International Arrivals Hall and I tried to think. I want to say I was calm, but I wasn't. I was the specific kind of not calm where your brain goes very quiet and very cold and you move through the steps because falling apart isn't an option. My battery was at 11%. I needed to use it correctly. I called my best friend back home in Columbus first. She talked me through my immediate options, her voice steady and practical in a way that made me want to cry. She told me to find a British Airways customer service desk. She told me to ask about unaccompanied or distressed traveller assistance. She told me, very specifically, not to give my phone to anyone. The British Airways agent I found was a tall man named, and I remember this clearly, Clifton. He had a Cardiff accent and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he listened to my entire story with his arms crossed and an expression of increasing disbelief. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Your brother took your passport," he said. "Yes, And your mother boarded the flight anyway? Yes. He looked at me for another moment. Then he picked up the phone on his desk. What happened in the next 4 hours was a lesson in how bureaucracy can, occasionally, work exactly the way it's supposed to. Clifton connected me with the airport's passenger welfare team. They connected me with the US Embassy duty officer in London, a woman named, I only know her first name, Sandra, who was brisk and competent and made it very clear very quickly that what Trevor had done had a name. Withholding a family member's travel documents to strand them in a foreign country, she said. That's not a misunderstanding. That's coercive control and potentially criminal, depending on intent. I hadn't used those words. I hadn't even fully understood in those first few hours that what was happening was something beyond a terrible family argument. But Sandra used them, and something clicked into place. The reason Trevor had done it, the actual reason which I pieced together over the following weeks from a combination of what my mother finally admitted and what I found going through old emails, was money. Our grandmother had died the previous year. She'd left behind a modest estate, a paid-off house in western Pennsylvania, some savings, a few small investments. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough that Trevor had been angling over it since the funeral, trying to get my mother to agree to certain arrangements that would, functionally, cut me out of any inheritance I might otherwise have had. I hadn't known any of this. I didn't even know my grandmother had left anything substantial. She'd always seemed to live simply, and no one had told me the specifics of the estate. Trevor had apparently told our mother that I'd said things about her. Terrible things. That I'd been telling people in our extended family that she was incompetent, that she shouldn't control her own finances, that we should push for conservatorship. None of it was true. Not a word. But my mother believed him. She'd always believed him. The trip, I finally understood, had been designed partly as a test to see whether my mother could be maneuvered into a confrontation with me, and partly as an opportunity. Trevor had been working on her for months. The Edinburgh plan, the document handling, the budget reasons, it was a setup. Get me stranded alone in a foreign country, create chaos and drama, then use my distress and anger as evidence of instability. He'd done the math and decided that if things got messy enough, if I appeared volatile or difficult enough, my mother would side with him completely. She almost did. Sandra at the embassy helped me file a report with the Metropolitan Police regarding the withheld passport. The officer I spoke to was patient and thorough and did not minimize what had happened. He told me that Trevor, when contacted, would need to return the document and that there could be further action depending on the circumstances. Clifton at the British Airways desk helped me find a quiet corner of the airport with a charging station. I sat there for 3 hours, alternating between crying and eating an overpriced sandwich, waiting for my phone to charge and for the bureaucratic gears to turn. Trevor called again at 4 p.m. This time his voice was different, less pleasant. The police called me, he said. I know. That was completely unnecessary, Paige. This is a family matter. You took my passport, Trevor. You left me alone in a foreign country. You had Mom get on the plane without me. This stopped being a family matter around hour 1. Silence. Mom is very upset, he said finally. Good, I said, and hung up again. My passport was couriered to the British Airways desk by 7 p.m. Trevor had sent it from the Edinburgh hotel through a same-day courier service, probably the most expensive thing he'd paid for on that entire trip. I signed for it, held it in both hands, and felt something settle in my chest. Not quite relief. More like the re-establishment of something that had been wrongfully taken. The embassy helped me rebook onto a flight home. Different routing. Edinburgh was obviously not happening. I flew back to Columbus alone through Dublin, arriving 2 days after I was supposed to. My mother called when I landed. I let it go to voicemail. Here's what I want to tell you, because the comments on things like this always ask about accountability. Trevor faced real consequences, just not the kind that involve handcuffs. The Metropolitan Police opened a file. The US Embassy flagged the incident. None of that went to prosecution. I was back in the US, and international jurisdictional situations are genuinely complicated, but it existed. It was documented. And when my mother's estate attorney, a patient man she'd used for years in Columbus, was eventually made aware of what had happened on that trip, he took it seriously. The restructuring Trevor had been pushing for did not happen. My grandmother's estate was handled fairly. I know this because I finally hired my own attorney, which was something I should have done earlier and which I am now a strong advocate for. When family dynamics involve money, get your own lawyer. Do not assume good faith. Do not hand over your documents. The hardest part was my mother. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn something from her that she'd already decided to give entirely to someone else. I think a part of me believed that if I was good enough, patient enough, accommodating enough, she would eventually see me. The trip was supposed to be a celebration. I'd wanted it to be the thing that finally tipped something between us. Instead, she got on the plane. We had one conversation, about 6 weeks after I got home, where she said she hadn't known everything Trevor had told her was a lie. I believe that's partially true. I also know that on some level she hadn't looked very hard for the truth, because looking for it might have complicated a version of things she preferred. I told her that. She cried. I told her I loved her, which was true. I also told her that I needed time, which was also true, and that I couldn't keep being the person in the family who absorbed whatever Trevor decided to do without consequence, which was the truest thing I'd said to her in years. We're not estranged. But we are different. Something broke and reset at an angle, and I think we both know it. As for Trevor, I haven't spoken to him since the afternoon of the passport phone call. He sent 2 texts, both of which I've screenshotted from my records and not responded to. We see each other at family events approximately twice a year. He doesn't quite look at me anymore. I want to say it doesn't affect me, but that would be the kind of thing people say when they're still pretending. What I can honestly say is that it affects me less. That the feeling of standing in Heathrow with a dead phone and no documents, which used to wake me up at 3 a.m. regularly, has started to fade. What replaced it? Slowly, imperfectly, in the way that real things replace other real things, is something that's harder to name. Not triumph, not closure, which I've always thought is a word invented to make grief seem more linear than it is, something more like ground under my feet. I know who I am now in a way I didn't before Heathrow. I know what I'll do when someone takes something that belongs to me. I know that I'll make the calls and hold my ground and wait for the gears to turn, and that I will not get on the plane without my sister. I also know finally what I'm worth, and I didn't need my mother's accounting to figure it out. That's the part Trevor didn't plan for. That's the part I'm most grateful for. Some things you only figure out when someone leaves you with nothing, when the gate closes and you're still standing there, alone, with a dead phone and no documents and the slow, clarifying understanding that you are the only person in that airport who is going to save you. So you do. You find Clifton, you charge your phone, you make the calls, and eventually you go home. I thought a lot about what made Trevor believe he could get away with it, and honestly, he almost did. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger. The anger faded. What stayed is the understanding that he looked at me my entire life and concluded I was someone who wouldn't push back, someone who'd absorb it, rationalize it, find a way to make it okay. He wasn't guessing. He had 26 years of evidence. That's on me. Partially. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because it's true, and I think the truth matters more than comfort here. Every time I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. Every time I handed over something, a decision, a boundary, a document, because it was easier than the confrontation. Every time I told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being good. I was building a track record. And Trevor was reading it. What I know now, standing on the other side of all of it, is that people who manipulate others aren't usually smarter than the people they manipulate. They're just more willing to act. They've decided that getting what they want matters more than being decent, and they move on that decision without hesitation. Trevor didn't outthink me in that airport. He just counted on me not fighting back. He was wrong. Not because I'm exceptional. Not because I had some resource or skill he didn't anticipate. I had a charging station and a stranger named Clifton who took me seriously, and I made the calls I should have made years earlier. That's it. The difference between the version of me who disappears quietly and the version who calls the embassy is just the decision. The single, clear-eyed decision to treat what was happening as wrong rather than complicated. That's the thing about integrity. It's not a feeling. It's a practice. You do it when it costs something, or you don't really do it at all. I'd spent years watching Trevor operate with no integrity and facing no consequences for it, and I'd concluded somewhere along the way that that was just how things worked, that the people who played fair finished behind the people who didn't. Heathrow showed me I was wrong about that too, because what Trevor actually lost, beyond the estate restructuring, beyond the police file, beyond my mother finally being forced to look at who her son actually was, what he lost is the version of me who would have stayed quiet. That person is gone, and everything he was planning long-term depended on her. Sandra at the embassy asked me once, before she hung up, if I wanted to pursue further action. I thought about it for longer than I expected to. I told her I just wanted my passport back and a flight home. She said that was enough, that sometimes that's exactly enough. I think she was right. Some battles you win by simply refusing to disappear, by charging your phone, by telling the truth to the right person at the right desk, by walking through the gate on your own terms with your own documents, headed somewhere you actually chose to go. Trevor wanted to strand me. He ended up showing me exactly who I was when no one was watching and nothing was guaranteed. Turns out I'm someone who makes the calls. That's enough. That's more than enough.